When it comes to talking about the best leaders in the Warriors series, the two names that seem to always come up these days are Crooked Star and Tall Star. Now, I'm not going to stand here on my soapbox and say that the only reason these two... I guess I'm actually sitting down to record this, I'm not actually on a soapbox. So I'm not going to sit here on my hypothetical soapbox and tell you that... What even do soapboxes look like? Isn't this the box soap comes in? Who stands on this thing? Frickin' leprechauns? Okay, so actually, I'm gonna say it. The two best leaders in the series are Bluestar and Firestar, and if you think any differently, then I guess don't. Alright, so let's talk about Bluestar and Firestar. Aside from them being the two best leaders from ThunderClan, what makes these two interesting to compare is that both are really well-imagined characters whose most prominent traits largely define everything good and bad about them. That is to say that their greatest virtues are intertwined with their greatest sins. They seem to both stem from the same general place. So when talking about these two as leaders, we have two very complex, somewhat contradictory characters to examine. Let's look at Bluestar first. What fundamentally defines Bluestar above all else is this profound sense of duty she has for her clan. This is expressed in many ways, perhaps most importantly in her ambition to become leader of ThunderClan. Now it's important to contrast this ambition with her counterpart to really make my point here. Thistleclaw also had an ambition to be leader, but his reasons are far more self-centered and self-serving than Bluestar's were. To break it down very simply, Bluestar wanted to be leader because she had to, while Thistleclaw wanted to be leader because he wanted to. Thistleclaw wanted the power and probably the thrill of leading his clanmates into battle. To him, in a sense, this was all fun and games. So now to really contrast this with Bluestar, she comes to a crossroads where she makes a mistake and gets pregnant and has Oakheart's kits at the worst time possible. With the ThunderClan deputy on the brink of retirement, she knew that she wouldn't be able to replace them as long as she had to care for her kits. So she really compounds her mistakes here and makes an even bigger and really awful decision to give away her kits to Oakhart, which results in one of them dying and the other two growing up without her. But even in this act, her virtue of putting the needs of her clan first still shine through. Quite poetically, in choosing the position of leader out of duty and obligation alone, the nature of her leadership is one that seems to lack any kind of personal pleasure or enjoyment. ThunderClan is constantly under external threats from ShadowClan and RiverClan, and later from the inside by TigerClaw. She watches as deputy after deputy either dies or betrays her, and by the time we reach Rising Storm, Bluestar is really left devastated. Her clan is shaken and depleted, everything she's worked tirelessly for has all but fallen apart despite her best efforts and intentions. And, worse still, she's haunted, tormented by her decision to abandon her kits, as she realizes that with that decision to choose duty also went any hope of her own sustained happiness. Her sense of duty makes her an unbelievably committed leader who was able to prevent a bad cat in Thistleclaw from rising to power, but in the same vein, it led her to abandon her own children and ultimately to a life of misery. Simply put, in becoming a leader out of duty, Bluestar was cursed with reaping only the fulfillment of said duty for the rest of her life. So I say all of that to really emphasize what an incredible life of perseverance Bluestar maintained. I mean, obviously when talking about what a great leader she was, you could point to her dedication to her clan she showed by giving away her kits, but I really don't count this as a positive, to be honest, especially since those kits were actually a part of ThunderClan. Since this was directly related to how she became leader, I kinda have to hold it against her, or at least put it together with her later breakdown that kind of ruined her legacy later on, since it was a large factor in causing it. But the real point of going into all of that was to demonstrate the enormous burden that she had to carry during her whole tenure. Even in the relatively good times, there's no doubt that between her personal grief and this need to put the weight of the world on her shoulders, she was dealing with personal struggles that, quite frankly, really overwhelm me just imagining it. It's hard enough getting up early in the morning to work when you're tired or stressed or just want to be somewhere else, but Bluestar had to deal with regret and despair every every single day, which no doubt even furthered the normal burden of a leader. If you gave up your own kids and inadvertently killed one of them just so you could be leader because you were the only one who could really lead them, then my god, you better be absolutely flawless and turn out good results, or else you're gonna beat yourself up non-stop. Every mistake, every death, every stroke of bad luck, Bluestar no doubt magnified in her mind. I cannot imagine the torment she must have felt, which, when you consider everything she actually accomplished, makes it all the more impressive. Not only did she lead her clan to defeat Brokenstar when every other leader had capitulated, but she did so short-staffed and, despite the recent deaths of her two top clanmates in Lionheart and Spotted Leaf, was able to clearly perceive the situation at the end of Into the Wild and put her faith in two outsiders, Firepaw and Yellowfang, who ultimately defeated ShadowClan without a massive bloody invasion. When you step back and really look at that decision, it's actually pretty amazing the kind of clear mind she had to have had in order to be able to make those decisions. Coupled with her ability to understand Spotted Leaf's prophecy, fire alone will save our clan, and apply it to Firepaw against massive controversy and bewilderment, she demonstrated, really, an incredible ability to compartmentalize her own struggles to where she could think clearly and serve her clan. As a result, she not only led ThunderClan through some of their greatest trials ever, but also saved the entire clan structure by discovering the cat who would become Firestar, as well as decide to bring the exiled Wind Clan home. So definitely, Bluestar has a strong case here to be considered the greatest leader based on the merits of her actions alone, but when you couple them with her own personal struggles, they become even more impressive. Now we move on to Firestar, who, over the course of the last 18 months, I've had a good deal to say about. However, despite talking rather exhaustively about him, especially in two of my more recent videos, there's one thing I've been meaning to talk formally on since last summer. One of the camps in the Warriors community seems pretty bent on labeling Firestar a Mary Sue, which, if you don't know, is pretty much a pop colloquial slur for a boring, perfect character who faces no real challenges in a story. Putting aside the rather small-minded presupposition that such a character is inherently untenable or that they unequivocally ruin any story they're in, I've long maintained that Firestar is not a perfect, flawless character. Some seem to cynically roll their eyes at Firestar going out of his way to do the right thing, by letting his inner conscience guide him to nurse and feed his enemies, both figuratively and literally. As I've previously explained, Firestar has embraced the sort of general revelation of morality and holiness that can be found in nature, existing even outside of the prescribed law of the warrior code, which in turn allows Firestar to instinctively be a paragon of warrior virtue. So whereas Bluestar acts selflessly with regards to a moral duty to ThunderClan, Firestar is more inclined to act selfless with regards to a more universal moral duty. We can see rather clearly how this all plays out. Firestar is able to construct trust and friendships with those outside of his own clan. He displays patience and empathy with even those who lash out against him. He considers the greater picture, always willing to assist anyone in need. He doesn't advocate for wanton violence or conflict, but nonetheless can stand firmly for what's right. Most of the time, anyway. And herein lies Firestar's greatest flaw. His compassion and wish to love everyone no doubt lead to a great deal of good. However, both have been shown to cloud his judgment, especially when dealing with those closest to him. This is best demonstrated with what could modestly be described as an adulterous lust for Spotted Leaf. Of course, this lust isn't merely a feature of the first series, but carries on quite prominently into the book Firestar's Quest, where even as a leader with a loyal maiden Sandstorm, Firestar is still susceptible to this desire. And even after it seems to have been resolved there, the writers have added that their later decision to kill off the ghost of Spotted Leaf in Omen of the Stars was predicated on them not wanting Firestar to have to choose between her and Sandstorm in the afterlife. Now, this line of reasoning seems to have been universally trashed by this community, so I'd like to take this moment to be the one voice of reason here and actually commend the writers for this. Lots of people seem to be under the impression that this statement undermines a character arc or a message or something, and quite frankly, I think this is just a little silly. For one, Firestar waking up and reconciling with Sandstorm way back between the first and second arcs does not mean that whatever lust he had for Spotted Leaf was necessarily or permanently dissolved. And since I'm one of those people who correctly think that the intent of an author is an imperative tool for understanding a story, then I'm inclined to believe that this is exactly what happened. Firestar didn't ever really free himself of his sinful desire for Spotted Leaf, and as such, he was personally unable to reconcile it by himself. This is actually a pretty profound and necessary statement on the nature of people, in that while we can do good things and even work on and improve ourselves, ultimately we're personally incapable of ridding ourselves of all evil actions and desires. And in this case, it's rather absurd and contradictory in that Firestar's great failing here seems to stem down to his deep desire to care for others, to the point that it both blinds him and probably obstructs him from properly separating himself from Spotted Leaf. As a side note, now that we know that the Arthurian stories had a big influence on warriors, I can't help but wonder if this romance was perhaps softly inspired by the affair of Lancelot and Guinevere, but I digress. Now, as far as being a leader goes, this one thing probably doesn't hold a lot of negative weight on its own, aside from perhaps hurting Sandstorm and, at times, serving as a distraction in a variety of ways for Firestar. However, if we are to link this lust to Firestar's love for others, especially his friends, then we can find a similar instance of weakness in his loyalty to Graystripe. Most notably, this is a problem at the end of the New Prophecy arc, when Graystripe has been lost for months and more than likely dead. However, Firestar perpetually refuses to even consider naming a replacement deputy out of personal commitment to him. He's made a promise to wait for his friend and is resolved to do so to the detriment of ThunderClan. When he finally is forced to face reality, it's a very dramatic scene, and Firestar seems uncharacteristically tired and defeated. It's kind of a pathetic image of him that almost mirrors Bluestar on her most depressing days. As opposed to her, though, Firestar isn't so much cursed with the absolute burden of duty, so much as he is with the burden of his personal feelings. As I've noted, these feelings often serve to guide he and his clan to behave and get along exceptionally well with others. However, even in the so-called boring era of Firestar's character, he's still prone to genuine confusion and weakness from what appears to be the same root source. So for all of his amazing traits and accomplishments as a leader, it's really impossible to separate them from Firestar's more negative extremes. Overall, Bluestar and Firestar were both very impressive leaders, but personally they're far more complicated than some seem to give them credit for. They're both wise and virtuous, yes, but at the same time, they're both burdened with their own personal follies and vices, many of which on those two extremes seem to be intrinsically tied together. I really appreciate how the authors have decided to weave together their strengths and weaknesses, since I think it demonstrates a very real folly that people fall into. Fall into. Even as we approach goodness through our greatest virtues, by that same token, we can just as easily drag ourselves back into evil by our own blind nature.